Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Craic on the Coast, your go-to podcast for Irish culture, history, music, and mischief right here on the South Shore of Massachusetts and beyond. I'm Mike Schilling.
And I'm Shaun Morgan, just rooting and tooting and holding steady on the coastline, pint in hand and ready for today's crack.
And today we are super excited because we've got a very special guest in the booth. Joining us is Michael Reardon, a Guinness Brewery Ambassador who knows more about stout than most of us know about our family trees.
You know, you're not wrong there. And if you've ever wondered how Guinness pairs with oysters being on the South Shore, or why it's the drink of choice for so many around the world, this episode is going to be a treat. Or maybe it'll just be a shocking good time.
Before we bring Mike in, we'll talk just about Guinness in general. Everybody knows St. James Gate, Dublin, 1759. And Shaun, you can talk to this. It's more than just a beer at this point.
It's not a beer, it's Guinness.
Yeah.
Like, so don't even say that. It's not a beer, it's not a stout, it's Guinness. It's its own thing.
And it's woven into, I would say, fabric of identity at this point.
You look at, anyone sees the harp, they know it's Guinness.
Right.
And it's all automatically equated. And just it's woven into the Irish identity. You're going out somewhere in Ireland, you get tourists coming over. First place they want to go, I want to go get a pint of Guinness. I want to head to St. James's Gate. They want that real, authentic Irish experience, and Guinness goes hand in hand with that.
Well, we'll say it's kind of authentic. I wouldn't say the brewery tour is as authentic as it could be, but it's still a great time. It's really interesting to walk through.
Yeah, it's interesting to walk through to see how it's made. But once you get up to that Sky Bar and see the views of Dublin, you can't go wrong with that.
Oh, no, that's amazing. But yeah, so right now we'll bring Mike in. Welcome to Craic on the Coast, Mike.
Hey, gentlemen, how are you?
Good. So I would say how the first question would be, and we kind of talked about this a little bit beforehand, how did you end up with this job? Because the title, it sounds like a job that all of us would want.
Oh, I'm not. I'd say I'd kill someone for that job.
Yeah, it sounds far more important than it is, I think, with the word ambassador in there. But I'm quite proud of it. A little bit about the job. So the Guinness Brewery Ambassadors, there's two of us in the country. So we cover the entire country. My home market's New England. We are the local Guinness experts, so Guinness subject matter experts, beer experts. We train our internal teams, so sales teams on all things Guinness and Guinness quality. We train our distributors. We train bar staff. Then we do consumer-facing events, so like beer dinners, festivals, storytelling nights, lectures, anything like that. We drive our quality programs in the United States, so Guinness Perfect Pint certified. And then we also do a little bit of PR, social media, podcasts, radio interviews, television. But how I got into it, so I've been doing this for 10 years. I've always been a big Guinness fan, always been really into beer. I was living in New York, bartending and managing restaurants, and I kind of thought I could take that hospitality thing and get my foot in the door in the beer world. So I actually moved back to Massachusetts, worked at a couple local brew pubs, then a larger regional brewery. And then I was lucky enough that they created this role, and I had a friend who kind of had an inside track with the recruiting process, and I interviewed, and I've never looked back. And that was just a long way of saying that I travel the country and I go to pubs. So
and get paid to do it.
And get paid to do it. That's the important
part. Let's focus on
yes,
that
yeah.
piece.
Right.
I travel the country and I go to pubs. I don't get paid to do that.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of jobs I would like, but I wouldn't get paid to do it. Well, that's great. So you're originally from Mass?
Yes. Yep. Grew up in Wilmington, Mass. Currently live in Lowell, Massachusetts.
Nice. Nice. So I don't know. What are you thinking, Shaun?
Well, just going back to the ambassador bit, how did you fall into it? You were doing that piece, but where was that position advertised? What type of process did you have to go to become a Guinness ambassador?
Yeah, so I'd already been working in beer education. So I'm a certified Cicerone, and the Cicerone program is basically the beer industry's equivalent to a wine sommelier. So one of the larger regional breweries I worked at, I was already doing kind of VIP experiences and beer education and training. I'd also been a draft tech for a brief period of time. So I had that kind of background and knowledge base for the job. I actually went through, they had a recruiter, Brewbound had posted the job. And I went through a recruiter there, and, pretty long drawn out interview process. They were looking for the right people. to have that knowledge base. And I think, especially in Massachusetts and New England, it's a big craft beer culture. So I think a lot of people were ingrained in that, and they weren't, the people who had the knowledge weren't ready to leave to go work for a larger, import brewery. But I was always a Guinness fanatic when it was legal for me to drink it, of course.
Of course. I mean, that goes without saying.
Which, brings us to a good point. We always like, whenever we speak publicly for Diageo, we always say, please drink responsibly. But yeah, I was always a huge fan. So for me, I mean, being Irish American, growing up north of Boston, I was just always attracted to that brewery. So for me, I always tell people it was like being called up to the big leagues, like playing in the minors, and like them saying, Sox saying like, hey, can you come up and pitch in the World Series? It's like, yes, I will, So, yeah.
Now, after you got brought on, what type do they put you through, like a training? Did they actually send you over to St. James Gate, and do you go through like a process that they, so that you're well versed in everything you got to talk about?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the training is always ongoing in the sense that, I mean, we're talking about a brewery that's been around for 266 years. So there's really no one that knows everything about it. Probably the closest we get to that is some of the folks that work at the Guinness Archives at St. James's Gate in Dublin. And the Guinness family has always been great about collecting that archive. So there's always something new to learn. We're always sending out newsletters, reading new material, new books, things like that. But, to start with, one of the first things we did do is we were sent over to Ireland. And we've gone over several times since then as a team. And we spend a couple days out in market in Dublin. At the time, our head of Dublin quality was this gentleman named Sean Mackin, who was a great guy. So we went out with Sean a couple days and did quality audits at all the different Dublin pubs and talked Guinness quality and how they implement it in Ireland. We spent a day at the brewery doing both the storehouse tour, which I always say is kind of like Disney World for beer, but also getting behind the scenes and going to the actual, brew house. We have on the property, we have brew house number 1 through 4. So they never completely tore down any of the brew houses. So as the operation got larger and more high tech, they would move into a new building. They'd build a new brewery, but they never tore down the original ones. Wow. So they gutted them of equipment and stuff like that. So they're not all completely intact, but you can visit the sites. So we went from Brewhouse 1 all the way to Brewhouse 4, which is our most modern brewery. You go to the roast house and learn how we roast our barley, which is probably one of the most important aspects of our beer that sets it aside from all other beers out there, is we roast all of our own barley on site.
That was probably one of my, at the tour, when you go into that room and there's all the different scents and everything else. Yeah. That was probably one of my favorite parts of the tour.
The smell of that roasted barley is one. So in the roast house at St. James Gate in Dublin, we have 4 gigantic drum roasters. And drum roast is very similar if you've ever gone to like a craft coffee roaster. Same piece of equipment, but tens, hundreds of times that size. And the aroma coming out of that building is just like heaven. If that doesn't make you thirsty, I don't know what will. It's heavenly. Yeah, it's great.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're over there fairly frequently, training. Now we have 2 breweries here in the United States. So we have one in Baltimore, the Open Gate Brewery in Baltimore, and we have one in Chicago as well that just opened last year. So we visit those fairly frequently. They don't brew any of our core brands. So they don't brew Guinness Draft, Extra Stout, Foreign Extra Stout, Smithwick's, Harp, anything like that. They're brewing all new beers for those tap rooms. They're very small facilities, like 10 beer barrel brew houses.
I think there might have to be a site visit coming up.
Yeah, definitely. On the road. We'll go on the road.
That drive to Baltimore is not too bad. But yeah, so we go there as well, and our brewers there are brilliant, and they can make any beer under the sun, and from IPAs all the way to Irish dry stouts, and they have that ability to kind of really play around with like, how do we tie in that Guinness legacy into these more modern craft beers, which is really fun to see them do.
Very cool.
That's awesome. I mean, again, the legacy aspect coming in and trying to get those craft beers hitting the same market, but they're never going to beat the lease that St. James's Gate has.
Yeah.
You talk about market and genius. I mean, how they managed to get, was it a 5,000-year lease?
It's Arthur Guinness signed a 9,000-year lease, which is, you're right, it's fantastic rent control. You're not going to find that anymore.
We actually, I've talked to some of our business professors at UMass Boston to bring up, you want to talk about negotiation techniques? Like, let's look at that. And also anyone who wants to be in city management, how not to give away a 9,000-year lease to a company.
Yeah, I don't, and the history around how he got that is a bit foggy. I know longer leases were somewhat normal at the time, but not 9,000 years. And he also got the water rights to that part of the neighborhood, which is huge when you're a brewery.
Oh, yeah.
And a big part, it's just serendipitous. A big part of why Guinness was able to grow so quickly over, the late 1700s and through the 1800s. By the end of the 1800s, they were the largest brewery in the world. So right around the 1860s, 1870s, they had started to become the largest brewery in the world. Is that location at St. James Gate, because you're near two canals and the River Liffey. So that's giving you access to the rest of the country. It's giving you access to the oceans, which is giving you access to the world. And it was at a time where this style of beer, porter, and stout, which stout and porter, they're the same thing. We can get into that in a moment. But it was the most popular style of beer going at the time, and they were able to dominate in that market, and the rest is history. So it was really serendipitous to get that 9,000-year lease. But not only that, in that neighborhood where they had access to the River Liffey and to the canal and to the ocean. So, yeah.
Now, also as ambassador, do you visit establishments like throughout the area and throughout New England? Because I know, every time a new pub opens up, the biggest thing that they advertise is the tap system that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to get it as close as possible to what they'll serve in Dublin.
Yeah, so, the way it's supposed to happen and the way it almost always does is as soon as we get a new tap handle, we reach out to our distributor and we make the connection with the new pub and we set up a training date. So we go in, we do a little bit of a quality survey and then hopefully get the staff gathered around and we teach them all about Guinness quality and how to pour the pint, a little bit about beer and food so they can sell it over the bar. But the thing about Guinness, so we've been around for a long time, obviously. And because of that, there's a lot of myths about it, right? And one of the big myths, and you'll probably debate me on this, is Guinness is different in Ireland. And there's a sense of that that's true, and there's a sense of that that's not true. So
Sean's shaking his head now.
The part that's not true, it's made, all the Guinness we get here in the United States is made at St. James's Gate in Dublin. It's made by the same brewers. It's the same beer. It's put in the same bottles, cans, and kegs, right? It's shipped over to the United States well within its best buy date. That best buy date's around 6 months. And that's set by a taste panel at the brewery that's trained to taste Guinness. And if they taste anything off, that's when they mark it. So it's at that 6-month date that they detect some deterioration in the flavor, right? And I've been on a taste panel at a brewery, and it's as fun as it sounds, it's actually really serious business. So it gets here well within its best buy date. The other thing that you'll hear some old timers say that it's not pasteurized in Ireland, it's pasteurized here. So that's the difference in flavor. It's actually pasteurized in both markets. And flash pasteurization doesn't really change the flavor of beer significantly. So what it really comes down is to once it gets here and it gets to the right pub, the right place at the right time, is how it's treated at the pub. In Ireland, we have a stranglehold on that quality process. We have quality teams that are out on the streets visiting the pubs every single day, making sure the lines are clean, the pressure's correct, the gas blend's correct, glassware management, on and on and on. Smaller country, more feet in the street, saturated market, right? Mm-hmm. The United States, bigger country, less feet in the street, and the industry is a little bit different. We see a lot of turnover in the hospitality industry year to year in the States, where in Ireland, if you get behind the bar, not always, but chances are that that's going to be a career thing for you. You're going to be in the pub business. So when you learn how to pour a pint, when you learn how to, manage a draft system, manage glassware, that's something that you're going to be doing as a career. Whereas here, a lot of times we're getting part-time employees, students, things like that they're there one summer, they're gone the next. So it's this constant training, which is a big part of my job, which is this constant training. The places that do it the best, it comes from the top down, where it's this Guinness quality is ingrained in the management. They make sure that it's ingrained in their staff as well. But yeah, they have a stranglehold on that in Ireland, and that's really when you have a pint in the States and you're like, this is a little different than it is in Ireland. It comes down to that, how they're approaching quality at the pub. Now, with that all being said, we're blessed in Massachusetts and in New England to have the best pints in the country, like hands down, the best pints. New York might be able to argue with me on that a little bit, and me and my colleague do quite frequently. But we have the best pints in the country.
I like that statement.
Yeah,
and I'll even go out there and say, one of the best is probably JP Ryan's in Abington. Never had a bad pint when I'm in there. So
yeah. And we were talking before we came on. Brian Houlihan's Tinker's over in Norwell.
Tinker's as well. Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. And I know I listened to the last episode, and you raised a glass to Paddy Barry's.
Yes.
And that's unfortunate, but they always had a fantastic pint. And so we do have a program called Perfect Pint Certified, where we go to pubs and we're measuring 7 different quality standards. And if they can hit those quality standards, they get Guinness Perfect Pint Certified, which simply means they're serving it exactly the way that we would serve it in Dublin at any pub.
Is that public knowledge?
So we can't promote it in the sense that when we advertise and market, there's a lot of laws in the United States that prevent us from doing some things. So like we can't show favorability from one pub to another. So we couldn't say publish a list or say get yourself down to this pub. But it has a logo. And the logo, it looks very much like the retro draft boxes you'll see in Ireland now with the Waterford Crystal tankard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the red. So it's the same color scheme, but with the more modern looking pint on it. And that's Perfect Pint Certified. And if you ever see that logo in any of the pubs you go to, you know that place is Perfect Pint Certified. I promote them on my social media quite frequently, the pubs that are Perfect Pint Certified. So if you follow me, you don't mind if I plug?
No, not at all. Yeah. No, this is about sharing information. I want all of our listeners to know exactly where they should go and get a pint.
Where they should go and get it.
Adding into that, I'm just thinking, Roadshow Mike, we do a little tour and then create. I mean, that's an equivalent of Michelin star.
Yeah.
But you're looking for a quality pint. That's the goal for it. Yeah. I'm happy to do taste tests around the Commonwealth.
Seriously. We'll go with Mike and we'll
I'll join you for sure. I'll join you for sure. But yeah, you look for that logo and they also, when they become Perfect Pint Certified, they get digital assets where they can promote that on their own as well. So not only do they get the logo to hang somewhere in the pub, they get a letter from our head of global quality, Steve Gilsonen. They can also promote it through their social media and stuff like that. So if you want to know more about those pubs, like I said, I promote it a lot. And I'm on Instagram at @about_the_stout. And I only post about Guinness on that page.
There's a lot of pints on there. I checked it out.
It's a Guinness thirst trap. It's really just there to get people out to the pubs. That's the whole point of that.
One question I would have for you, and it's something that I've been really intrigued about, is, obviously going to the pub, getting it there is the ideal setting, but there's a lot of gadgets that are for sale over in Ireland now that we don't necessarily have received over here yet.
Okay.
And there's, the little battery-powered nitro surge that goes on the lid. There's also a couple other really big. I don't know how you would get your hands on it. If you had it in, I would love it.
The micro draft.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. I have one in my basement actually. I have a little basement pub, and we did test market the micro draft here in the States.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Really was rate of sale that we ran into with finding the right place for it, and because it uses its own can.
Right.
So you can't take one of our traditional Guinness pub cans and put it in that micro draft unit.
And that's the same with the nitro surge.
Same with the nitro surge. Yeah. So it was just really finding the right places for it. And what we found basically was if someone was doing well enough on cans, it was better to just get them to pour it on draft than to do the micro draft. And there was a little bit more of a market for that over in Ireland. But yeah, speaking of little gadgets, I have some Guinness draft pub cans. Would you guys like to sample some draft while we?
I mean, I think it'd be rude if we didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I can actually talk about this and these cans were just in the car.
Yep.
So if it explodes in my face, it's not because I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. But
I mean, this is also, I also am going to be very interested to see how you pour this, because this is going to be one of the most debated things in our hall when we're having
Yes.
pints after our meeting, is how to pour out of a can.
so hopefully we can clear this up for you. So inside this can is the widget.
Right.
So this is kind of one of the original, it's not the original gadget. We've always been looking at like how to create that nice, thick, dense cream and that breakout in Guinness. And actually before the widget, one of the gadgets we had was a Guinness syringe, believe it or not. So you get a pack of Guinness and it would come with this little syringe, and you'd pour your pint and then you'd take in some air and then you'd shoot the air back into the Guinness to make it foam up.
Really?
Wasn't the best way to go about it. So in the 1980s, when people start watching sports more at home, going out less, they have TV, there was more of a demand in Ireland and in the States to have a Guinness at home. So we invented something called the widget. So the widget is a little ping pong ball. It has a pinhole in it, and it goes into the can first before the beer goes into the can. Then we put the beer in the can under high pressure. And because of that little pinhole, some of the beer and some of the nitrogen that's already in the beer get into that pinhole. When we seal the can, because of the atmospheric pressure in the can, it just sits there dormant. But when we open the can, it jets out of that little pinhole and the ball starts to move around inside the can, which agitates the nitrogen in our beer. World's first nitrogenated beer, by the way. Nitrogen's hydrophobic. It doesn't want to be in the Guinness. So once we agitate it, it starts to break out a solution. And if we pour correctly, we're going to get as close as you can get to a pub pour at home in a glass. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to open your can one fluid motion, and hopefully the folks at home could hear that kind of release of gas and also that little whistle. We give it a 2 count to let the widget do its job, and then 45-degree angle, and then just gently pour the beer. Try to get a single stream coming out of the can, and we're going to bring that all the way up to the top of the glass, and then we're just going to let it settle, just like you would at the pub. Now I know there's some other pours that you probably alluded to earlier.
Oh my God, there's just a litany of, there's like just
in the glass, keep it going.
Yeah, dump the whole can in and just like rise it up, like
treat it like you're pouring a pint at a pub. Pour 3/4, let it settle.
Yeah.
So if you pour this can's 14.9 ounces. So if you pour it into a 16-ounce pint glass, you're going to get the cream right to where you need it to be. So I'll give that to you. Try not to spill, guys. Sláinte.
I also love these glasses.
Oh yeah.
So the one pour I'd say you probably shouldn't do is that pour where you kind of dump the can into the glass wholesale. I mean, you will get a nice breakout. You'll probably get a head height that's close, maybe a little too much cream on it. But you don't need to agitate it that much. The widget does that job for you. And then what you end up doing with that is, the can, it's been sitting at the shelf at the packy for hopefully not too long. 'Cause it's Guinness. But people have been touching it. It's been collecting dust. And then you basically dunk that into the glass you're about to drink. It's a lot more cordial to just pour it at that nice 45-degree angle and let it settle up.
That sounds like you're a little bit better hygiene too.
Yeah, you're going to get, and with the pub can, you're going to get a couple bubbles in your cream. You can see here. When we pour at the pub, that's one of the things we look at. There should be no bubbles in that cream. It should be thick, dense cream, nice dome across the top, 0 bubbles in the cream.
That looks beautiful.
But yeah, we invented the widget in the 1980s. It got released in 1989. In the 90s, they do this thing called the Queen's Awards in the UK, and one of the categories is the best invention of the decade or whatever. And the widget actually won that award, the Queen's Award for best invention, and it went up against the internet. So I think
that hands down, that was a better, yeah.
Of course, we didn't know what it was capable of back then.
Yeah.
But
I mean, you could literally say that the internet is the downfall of humanity. So I would definitely vote for the widget.
The widget's the savior, so it's fun.
Yeah. But yeah, so the widget does basically, like you had mentioned, the nitro surge that latches on the can. The great thing about the nitro surge, it gives you a little bit more control over that classic pour because you're actually pouring it through a Guinness spout, which we'd use at the pub. And the nitro surge actually through vibration facilitates that breakout of nitrogen. So it's doing the same thing. It's a matter of agitating the beer so the nitrogen breaks out of solution, rushes to the top of your glass, and creates that thick, dense cream.
Wow.
Which I'm going to have a sip of right now.
Yeah. Sláinte, boys.
Sláinte.
For the rest of the show, there'll be long pauses of silence.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
The folks at home will just have to know that we're
Great
having-
radio right now.
I know, for those listening, I have to say that's just a stellar drink. And if
Yeah,
you
it
haven't
is.
cracked a can with us, you're listening out.
Yeah.
Now, in that, I mean, the taste is
It's got a great glaze on it, too. I mean, it really is.
unique. I mean, that's what we're saying. Like it being different.
Yeah.
It's not a traditional stout. It's not a traditional porter. Guinness has its own, unique aspect to it, as opposed to some others in the Irish market that try and market themselves, depending on what region you're from, what county you're from. You might, the cursed B word that comes in every now and again.
Yeah.
But how did Guinness get such a stranglehold on that market aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things that Guinness does differently. I think we already talked a little bit about that authenticity. There's a cultural authenticity there. They have, a long history. Another big thing is quality, which we talked a little bit about that. And then the third would be innovation. They've always been looking to innovate. So even if we look back at the early 1800s, whenever some new piece of brewing technology was invented, they would be one of the first to adopt it. So, they used the hydrometer straight away to measure the gravity of their beers so that they could improve the efficiency of their brew house. They were one of the first to adopt the drum roaster. So the drum roasters we spoke about, those were invented in 1817 by this guy, Daniel Wheeler in the UK. And what that gave them the ability to do was to roast barley to a specific temperature where they got these certain flavors out of it, but they didn't burn the barley. They didn't char it. It wasn't overly sweet or anything like that. So previous to that, porters would actually have to sit inside these huge wooden vats for up to 3 months to mellow out, because the malt they were using was so inefficient. It was called blown brown malt, which would be like overly cloying and sweet one batch, and then the next batch would be like charred and earthy and burnt. So getting that control over the barley and really creating that signature flavor. So when you smell any of our beers, Guinness Draft, Extra Stout, Foreign Extra Stout, it's all the same ingredients, and it's just a matter of degrees of strength. That's the difference between the beers. So all of them have this beautiful aroma of coffee, toasted bread. There's a little bit of earthiness in there. There's some sweetness that hints towards chocolate, sometimes hints towards caramel, but never quite gets there. They all have that in common, and that comes from that unmalted roasted barley. So that was a huge change for us when we started using that technology. 1901, we actually opened up an experimental brewery, one of the world's first experimental breweries, because they really looked at brewing as a science, which is what it is. So they were hiring, one of the first breweries to hire chemists and biochemists out of university to be their brewmasters, to head up the brew process. So when they invented this beer in the 1950s, they already had this huge history of brewing science and innovation. The reason why Guinness Draft is the way it is, so in the 1950s, all beer was moving. And if I talk too much, just
No.
We brought you here to talk. So.
Yeah.
all beer was moving from cask pours, and the vast majority of Guinness in history has been drank out of bottles or from a cask pour. And they were moving from those cask pours over to modern draft systems. And they didn't like the way their beer was pouring on a modern draft system. And in Dublin, there was this pour that was really highly regarded by Guinness drinkers called lovingly A Pint of Plain. I'm sure you've heard the poem A Pint of Plain is Your Only Man. The Pint of Plain was a 2-cask pour. It was a high cask and a low cask. So your high cask was young, highly carbonated beer straight from the brewery. And your low cask was more mature aged beer, slightly more flavorful, but very little to no gas in it. So when you ordered a Pint of Plain, the publican would get behind the bar and they'd open up that high cask, and that would shoot just straight cream, right? It took about 7 minutes to settle up. So if you think 119.5 seconds now is how long it takes to pour a pint to Guinness, this took almost 7 minutes. So you'd have to call the pub ahead of time and tell them start getting the pints ready. So that would settle up, and then they would go over to the low cask. They'd open that up, and that less carbonated, more flavorful mature stout would bring that cream up to the top of the glass and just part of the rim. And there's still videos of this actually on YouTube because they were serving this all the way up into the 70s. So they were able to get, a newscaster in there and film some of the last days where pints of plains were being served in Dublin. And if you see the image of it, it looks a lot like Guinness Draft.
Wow.
So they hired a mathematician in the 1950s named Michael Ash. He worked in research and development, and this was one of the first problems he came up with was how do we want to serve Guinness on a modern draft system? And he came up with the idea of putting nitrogen into the beer. So nitrogen doesn't occur naturally in beer. CO2 does. It's just a product of fermentation. When yeast metabolize sugar, it creates alcohol, and it creates CO2 and a bunch of other stuff, but that's for another podcast. So there's always carbonation in beer. Even naturally fermented beers. But with modern beer, we tend to add extra carbonation into the beer at the point of packaging because we like that extra carbonic zip. With Guinness, we add nitrogen into that beer. Nitrogen is hydrophobic, like I said, it doesn't want to be in the beer. It creates smaller bubbles than CO2. So when it breaks out of solution, a carbonated beer, you're going to get this kind of rocky foam that dissipates quickly. But with Guinness, we get this thick, dense cream that sits on the head of your beer for the entirety of the drinking experience. So he came up with that in the 1950s. It got released in 1959 to celebrate our bicentennial. Actually first released in the UK. Back then we had a brewery in the UK called the Park Royal Brewery, only because the Irish brewers didn't think the dispensing technique had been mastered. A few months later, it was released in Ireland, and it was released here in the United States in 1965 in St. Louis.
Huh.
Which I think is gutsy for an import brewery to release their new flagship beer in St. Louis.
Sure.
At a department store, which is strange. There was a department store in St. Louis called Famous Bar, and they had a lunch counter that was fairly popular, and Guinness turned that into an Irish pub for 6 months. And that's where they launched Guinness Draft and Harp.
Wow.
It was like catching lightning in a pint glass. It just took off from there.
Whoever ran that department store must have knew someone.
I guarantee you the manager was probably from Ireland at some point, straight off the boat.
Yeah.
So now within that, so everyone knows, Guinness Draft, Guinness Stout, but the foreign extra stout isn't that common. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the foreign extra stout isn't that common in Ireland. It's not really that common in the States, though it's getting more common. But it's actually our best-selling beer worldwide. That was our first big export beer, and actually Arthur Guinness the second, his son, they wrote the recipe for that in 1801, just a few years before Arthur Guinness passed away. And back then it was called West Indies Porter, and it was an export strength porter. So porter and stout, same thing, same origin story. Arthur Guinness didn't invent stout. Porter was a beer that first kind of hit the scene in London, named after the people who drank it. So these guys who carried heavy stuff around the city. Stout was originally an adjective to describe strong porter. So you'd have like Porter X, Double X, you have Stout Porter. Eventually it just becomes its own name. But still to this day, one man's stout's another man's porter. There's so much crossover in the style guidelines, it's really hard to define. But this was an export strength porter, 7.5% alcohol by volume. Similar to what you hear about like IPAs, like higher hop rate, higher alcohol content. Both are natural antiseptic, so the beer keeps better, can make longer journeys. This West Indies Porter was the first Guinness we would have had here in the United States, actually. Okay. It arrived in the United States in 1817 to a gentleman named John Heavey in South Carolina. He ordered 8 hogsheads of Guinness. And we know that because we have the receipt in our archives. And a hogshead is a gigantic wooden barrel about the size of 2 American kegs. So a fair amount of beer, but not a ton. But to put that in context, so like Guinness has been in the United States, Yuengling has been brewing since, I want to say 1826. And that's the longest continuously operating brewery in the United States. So we've been in the United States longer. So we have a really long history of people enjoying Guinness here. And the United States was already primed for that influx of porter because it was already one of their favorite styles of beer. Actually, a lot of the founding fathers had their own porter recipes. And there was a gentleman in Philadelphia named Robert Hare who had a really famous porter brewery. So we were already kind of, primed for this porter import. But yeah, so that was West Indies Porter, evolved into Guinness Foreign Extra Stout. It became huge because it was an export stout. It became huge in Africa, the Caribbean, Jamaica, Southeast Asia. For years, a large foreign extra stout brewery was in Nigeria. We still brew a lot out of Nigeria. And in fact, the top Guinness drinking nations in the world per capita, and that's the caveat, is per capita. Ireland's number one. Then it's followed by Nigeria. And then for the third spot, third and fourth kind of flip-flop is the UK and Cameroon. So they kind of flip-flop back and forth. And then the United States is in fifth typically, which I'm doing my best to change that.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to do a bit better.
So when you originally reached out to us, one of the things, when you were talking about collaborating and coming on, was talking about oyster pairings.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I had to do a little research on after I heard it. I then talked to a friend who she was telling me that that's a really big thing over in Ireland. I didn't realize that Galway hosted like the International Oyster Festival every year.
Yeah.
So maybe you could.
Which we've been a sponsor for years. Yeah. I mean, so porter and oysters has been a thing since day one, like even back when the style of beer was invented in London, because back then, so porter was the common man's beer and oysters was the common man's lunch. In fact, like a bottle of porter and a dozen oysters used to be called the poor man's lunch.
Huh.
Because back then, pretty much any harbor on the planet was chock-a-block full of oyster reefs. Dublin, for sure, was full of oyster reefs. So it was a very cheap and accessible source of food. So it's been around for a long time. We started using it in advertising fairly early. So we didn't actually start advertising till the 1920s. But in the 1930s, we took out an advertisement that had a quote from a letter that the Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli wrote to his wife that said, "I supped at the Carlton on Guinness and oysters, and thus ended the most remarkable night of my life here too." So we started using that in magazine advertisements, newspaper advertisements, and then it just went off from there. So we have a great, like the whistling oyster was a story of an oyster that had been heard in an oyster tub whistling outside of a pub. And the Guinness, company, of course, jumped on that and said it must have been whistling for a pint of Guinness. So we've been advertising Guinness and oysters for a long time, but it really is one of the greatest beer and food pairings, and in my opinion, one of the greatest culinary experiences. And especially here in New England, where we're in like the midst of a fantastic oyster renaissance. I mean, there's farms up and down the coast doing all sorts of great things with oysters. I, as a big part of my job, I've been out at oyster farms and at oyster bars and raw bars and pubs and really promoting this pairing. And why does it work so well? Oysters. So really, if I'm talking about pairing Guinness with anything, my first go-to would be seafood. Because typically fish, they're a little sweet and they have that saltiness, that brininess, and that goes really well with Guinness. And it really starts to shine when we're talking about bivalve. So oysters, mussels, clams, cockles, scallops, things like that.
Sure.
So all oysters base level, the meat's a little sweet, which complements the sweetness in the Guinness, those sweeter notes, those hints of caramel, those chocolate notes. And then there's that brine, that's the salinity. We all know salt's a flavor intensifier, so that's going to make the roasted coffee chocolate kind of pop off your palate. But also salt dries out your palate. And this beer is bone dry. Guinness has this long, just no sweetness in the back end, this nice long dry finish. So oysters actually extend that dry finish, which makes you just want to go, like, ask any brewer what's the number one quality of a refreshing beer. And I know people don't think of Guinness as refreshing, unfortunately, but it is how dry a beer is. So add that salinity and extend that dry finish. All you want to do is go in for another sip of Guinness. And then that's just base level. Depending upon where the oysters are farmed, you can get notes of minerals and, things like flint, or you can get vegetable notes, seaweed, melon, on and on and on. So there's all these different flavor profiles that you can play with. And then you can get to our bigger, more robust beers. So like the extra stout, which I have here, or the foreign extra stout, which we talked about earlier, that has notes of like plum, fig, raisin, espresso, burnt sugars, and you can really get into, playing with those pairings. I love oysters raw, but I have a great recipe at About the Stout for an oyster stew, oyster Thanksgiving stuffing, grilled oysters. There's just so many different ways to do it, and it's fantastic. It's
Sounds like a new summer food for me.
Yeah.
It seems, the way you describe it seems so simple that they pair together, but it's just not the first thing on the top of your head.
Right.
That I'm going out for a pint and I'm going to get a dozen oysters to sit on the side, but it makes sense when you put it like that. So what would be your perfect pairing method? Like what type of oyster are you looking at?
Okay. Well, some favorites. We work with a lot of these oyster suppliers because they're in the pub, so I don't want to cast light on any one individual. What I look for, like, I actually like eating oysters more going into the holiday season, so like October, November, December.
Oh, wow.
So when oysters are in the colder waters, they plump up. They create this thing called glycogen. It's like a natural antifreeze. It's sugar, so they get plump and they get sweeter. I really love Duxbury oysters.
That's not just because he's on the South Shore, right?
Yeah.
No, nothing to do
But they
with
really are almost similar to the oysters in New York, like Blue Points. I always call them the Lay's potato chips of oysters. Like once you pop, you can't stop. They're like crisp. They're just briny enough. They're nice and sweet, and there's some subtle kind of mineral flavors and things like that going on. Which, like, if you're just going to have a dozen oysters raw with a pint of Guinness, that's a fantastic way to go. Here in New England as well, the coast of Maine, and I always pronounce this wrong, but Damariscotta, Maine. On the Damariscotta River, which is really like a tidal estuary, there's 8 oyster farms. And they just have some of the world's greatest oysters. Even the wild dam, they call them wild dams up there, that they get from the bottom of the river, are just these big, plump, some of them are like dinner plate size oysters. They have this great meaty quality to it. And depending upon how they're harvested out, they can get notes of seaweed, they can get notes of melon, all this sort of great stuff. So I really recommend going up to Maine as well. Rhode Island, Connecticut, pretty much wherever you go right now in New England, you're going to find a cool little oyster farm, and you're going to find a reason to pair it with a pint.
It's interesting you talk about it, like ideal season being fall, yet I would always kind of associate like a raw bar with like a summer feel. And I think that might be, I drink Guinness 12 months a year, but
yes,
I think especially for like a younger generation, the idea of Guinness being a summer beer, like I think that would really kind of throw them off. But the idea of pairing it with something that would be associated with outdoor dining,
Yeah,
it's something that we're continuously working on. So it's true that unfortunately here in the United States, we have this thing where people will call it like stout season, like when they get into the fall and winter. Now, we know in Ireland there's no such thing as stout season. There's barely anything reminiscent of seasons. It's cold and wet and cold and wetter.
Here, hold on. We get maybe 2 weeks of summer a year, okay?
It's really hot over there right now, I think.
It is.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say they're having their summer right now.
Right.
And the other week was in April, so it's fine.
So I'm pouring you some extra stout. Pardon the extra foaming there because I'm pouring it into that used glass, but let that settle. You'll be.
Oh no, it's the middle of the day and we're drinking Guinness.
But yeah,
it's Friday though.
It is Friday.
It is Friday.
Oh, that's true. It's something we're always working on is dispelling the myth of stouts being seasonal, Guinness being seasonal. A big part of that is people think that dark beer means heavy beer. And that comes from the American craft beer industry.
Yeah, I was just going to hit you that, everyone automatically has that, Guinness is so heavy.
Right.
It's packed with calories. That myth of, 10 slices of bread?
Right.
And
in a glass,
come
meal
on.
in a jar. It's all that stuff. We were just talking about foreign extra stouts. That's 7.5% alcohol by volume. And that's our biggest seller in Jamaica. Right, so you can drink Guinness Draft on the beach. It's 4.2% alcohol by volume.
Right.
It's 124 calories per 12 ounces, which puts it right in line with light beer. The thing that makes you full when you drink beer, like when you're like, I can only have a couple beers because I feel full and bloated, it's actually the gas in the beer. So if you drink a lager that has a lot of carbonation in it, that's what makes you feel full. But with Guinness, most of the gas breaks out during the pour, and we have very low volumes of gas in the beer to begin with, so it doesn't have that same filling quality. It's actually, I think that's the greatest magic trick that the Guinness brewers have pulled off, is you do have this beer that has a full mouthfeel because that the silkiness that the nitrogen contributes has this full mouthfeel. It has this robust flavor where we're talking about toasted bread and coffee and chocolate and all this sort of stuff. But it's light. It's low in ABV. It's built for the session. It evolved in Dublin pubs where you're supposed to go to the pub, meet friends and family, tell stories, laugh. It's not a one and done double IPA. The craft beer averages, and I love craft beer, don't get me wrong. I love all beer. I can find a reason to love any beer. But craft beer, 6.5% is the average ABV. So this is 4.2, much more sessionable. And like I said earlier, the number one indicator of a refreshing beer is how dry it is, that lack of sweetness on the back end. So we're continuously trying to dispel that myth of like, hey, you can drink Guinness on the coast during the summer, and it pairs great with seafood. It pairs great with, salads and, whatever you might be enjoying. It's not just for those, cozy rainy days in the pub. But I mean, it's for those too.
I think you nailed it. If it's good enough for the beaches of Jamaica, then it's good for the South Shore and Cape Cod. So
right there.
Oh yeah,
we'll be pushing that out there.
So I also would say that one of the things that has been an achievement of theirs, because it's something we actually talked about this, having this available at our AOH hall, is Guinness Zero.
Mm-hmm.
It is a real player, and not just for people that might not be interested in alcohol, but just for an option of going out and not having to worry about having 3 or 4
Right.
and then getting behind the wheel of a car or anything like that. I mean, it's pretty darn close.
Yeah. Guinness Zero's been huge, and rightfully so. So it starts life as Guinness Draft. We don't brew another beer that tries to emulate Guinness Draft without alcohol in it or anything like that. We brew Guinness Draft. And then it goes through a cold filtration process that pulls the alcohol out. And that's where you get Guinness Zero. When you do that, you do lose a little bit of the body of the beer. So that mouthfeel. So we add a little bit of sugar back in to get that body back. So when you're drinking Guinness Zero, if you're used to draft, I'd say the first sip to second sip, you might know. I notice it as a lack of the roastiness quality.
Okay.
Some people say, oh, it's a little more sweet. I think we're describing the same thing. By that third or fourth sip, it's Guinness Draft.
No.
And that's no easy feat. Like a lot of breweries that are making non-alcoholic beers, they don't have a beer to compare it to, where we're trying to make this be the Guinness Draft experience, the same flavor profile, the same look, the same mouthfeel. And I think they've accomplished it. And like you said, like sometimes you don't want to drink, but
You want to stand with a pint with your
there's
hand.
something about having
Yeah.
a pint in your hand.
Yeah.
It's how you gesture when you're at the pub, and just having the weight of that pint in your hand and being able to toast, be able to gesture with it. That's all you really need. And Guinness Zero is great for that. It's great for people who don't want to drink. It's great for designated drivers.
From what I understand, it's also a decent seller over in Ireland too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we've
It's
had like several
amounts,
people over, and we've treated them to dinner, and that's what they have when they go out, and they were like, I just don't feel like I need, the alcohol anymore.
Right.
It's really about just having a pint.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's been big, and like I know I always have it at home, at the ready. If friends, family come over and someone's not feeling, they don't want to have a pint, they don't want to drink or whatever. But for me, like even if I'm going out to do an event, I'll have a pint and then I'll have a zero.
Yeah.
And then I'm good. And it's fine. Like I said, to be in front of people talking about Guinness and have that zero in hand just feels better than to not. So Guinness Zero is just great. Can't say enough good things about it.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, one question I would have for you, and we talked about it earlier, is the breweries that are, out in Chicago and down in Baltimore and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, just for everybody who's listening that is, wants to explore beyond the 3 staples, is there anything that you have seen them producing out of those breweries that is stand out?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So they've done a lot of great things. When Baltimore first opened, so the Baltimore Brewery is actually in an old distillery. The property used to be a distillery. So the building which the brewery and the tap rooms in was a rick house. So a rick house is where you would age the whiskey barrels. And because we're Diageo, they had a lot of access to whiskey barrels if they wanted to. And one of the first things they did was they started aging stout in bullet bourbon barrels. And they released a series of barrel-aged beers, and one of them was an imperial stout that was aged in bourbon barrels, and it was magnificent. Most of those stouts for me are too cloying, and they're too viscous. They sit on the palate a little bit too long, a little overwhelming. But these beers at 11% ABV were still balanced, and I think that's another thing Guinness brewers. Every beer I've ever had from Guinness is balanced. So a lot of beers you'll have, particularly here in the United States, is they tend to be novelty beers where they do one flavor like really big and they hit you over the head with that flavor. Like, this is tropical fruit, or this is, we put Oreo cookies in the mash tun, like that sort of stuff. Which again, it's always good to push the envelope and try that stuff. But Guinness, no matter what beer they're making or what adjuncts they're utilizing, they tend to bring a sense of balance. So it's a more symphonic experience when you're drinking a Guinness. The flavors are working in harmony. They're not overwhelming each other. They're not overwhelming you. So those barrel-aged beers, they did one that was based off an old-fashioned cocktail.
Oh, really?
They did a chocolate mint one. They got a little crazy with it, but those were fantastic. Their IPAs are really good. They have a Galaxy IPA that's delicious, and I've started drinking less IPAs. But whenever I visit one of the tap rooms, I have an IPA. Just for St. Patrick's Day, they did an amber ale, and they utilized breakfast tea in it. So they utilized Irish breakfast tea in it, and it had this nice kind of tannic bitterness to it, which is different from that kind of alpha acid hop bitterness, and really dried the palate out. And it was a really nice amber ale. So they've done a lot of creative stuff. They've done, imperial, like bigger stouts, but put it on nitro and nitrogenized it to get that kind of silky smooth mouthfeel with a bigger, more robust beer.
Was the coffee one out of one of those, or was that out of...
Coffee was out of Dublin.
It was
the
out of
one that we
Dublin.
did a few years.
Yeah.
The milk stout was out of the OGB. We had a white ale that came out of the OGB as well. We actually had one that came out of the OGB in Dublin too.
The coffee was nice. I mean, if there was an excuse to have a Guinness with breakfast, that was it. I mean, it was...
I mean, do you need an excuse?
No, I don't.
Come
I
on.
mean, yeah. Just to feel a little bit better about yourself.
That's how you start holidays, or how you start the Six Nations in the spring, My wife will come in like it's 8:00 in the morning, like Ireland's playing, okay? Just leave me alone.
I'm on Ireland time now.
This is great. I feel like I could talk about Guinness for hours, but unfortunately, we only have one.
I know, but I get the sense of roadshow and part two.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would be up for having you on again, Mike, to just talk about like anything that's being released that's new, just to inform people. Because I feel like a lot of people have really, I mean, beer itself is so much beyond what it was 25 years ago. Like
Right.
just the nuances of it and everything else. And the fact that Guinness has, the brewery in Baltimore and Chicago, and they're doing stuff that's beyond just stout and porter. I think people would be interested in hearing about it.
Yeah. It's a way to kind of reintroduce or introduce people to Guinness where they might be a little bit more comfortable trying, a lager at the Open Gate Brewery. And then maybe, we can kind of convince them because the stouts is always that's going to be our bread and butter. That's our history. That's where the authenticity is. But maybe we can kind of convince them to try that Guinness draft and dispel some of those myths. So I would say, to everyone over this summer, like get out there, go to your local pubs, because that's what this is all about, is like being at the pub, supporting your local pubs. Those are the people I work with on a daily basis. Hospitality is not easy, so get out there and support them. And try Guinness with oysters this summer. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
I love that idea.
Yep. Like I say, I know what I'm doing. It's Friday afternoon. We're on the South Shore. Might have to go for some oysters.
Oh, yeah. And oysters, I mean, like you were saying, up and down the coast now, you can find them anywhere now. So
Yep.
yeah. That's great stuff.
So on that, as we're approaching summer, we're coming up to, Memorial Day is coming up, the official start of summer. Are there any events going on that you're aware of, that would be great for people to hit that Guinness are a part of?
Well, so next week in Baltimore, I'll be at the Preakness. So we have a big activation at the Preakness. We actually brew a lager out of Baltimore for the races. So we'll be there. We'll be pouring pints. We'll be sampling out that lager. So that should be fun. Throughout the summer, I mean, we'll be doing. I'll be doing beer dinners. So if you follow me at About the Stout, you'll see, different beer dinners. Oyster pairings, Irish festivals going into September. We have the Lowell Irish Festival, which I like to plug because it's my hometown.
Yeah.
And we do the North Shore Perfect Pint up there. We'll be all over the place. You'll always see us. Now we have our sports sponsorships as well. So we have Premier League. Going into the fall, we're sponsors with Notre Dame now and Navy, and so I think you'd be hard pressed to not find Guinness. We're kind of everywhere nowadays.
And then jump ahead a year from now, we've got the World Cup.
I know that's really exciting.
That's
really
huge,
exciting,
especially with one of the group stages being here in Massachusetts and a guaranteed quarterfinal as well.
Yeah.
It'll be awesome.
Yeah. Now, you were talking about the Guinness dinner, and we were having a discussion before we started recording about the one that you did over at Tinker's for Brian Houlihan. Now, a question I would have is that something that always would be coordinated with the owner of the establishment, or could someone reach out to you directly about coordinating something like that with not outside of a pub, but being able to coordinate that and then reach out to their local establishment and be able to set something like that up?
A little bit of both. I mean, typically we do it directly with the pub. Mm-hmm. A lot of the ones that I do in Massachusetts are annual. So we've been that was our second annual one at Tinker's. So a lot of the ones I do in Massachusetts are annual. But yeah, I mean, one of the great things about my role is that we're kind of like an incubator. Like we're able to take risks, try new things. It's not like cookie cutter events or activations. So yeah, if someone were to reach out and say like, hey, I have an idea, I'm more than happy to listen to them. And if we can make something work where it's good for Guinness and it's good for one of our local accounts, then that's perfect.
I have an idea. I mean, I'm not going to share it yet.
Oh no, just keep it under our hat for now.
Yeah. It has to do with us.
Has to do with us ending up getting divorced then? Is that the point? Well, for everyone listening, if you haven't gotten the thirst on you yet, it's Friday afternoon or it's whatever time of the day and whatever day it is you're actually listening. So go crack a can of Guinness, open a bottle, enjoy yourself. And if you have time, I'd say grab a dozen oysters and get going on that.
Definitely. We want to thank Mike for being on the show today. This was great. Again, I definitely would want to have you back, maybe once a quarter or something like that, where we can just talk about what's going on with Guinness and go from there and actually collaborate on a couple of things. I think it would be really cool to do that.
Yeah, that'd be a blast. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I had a good time, and anytime you guys want to talk about Guinness, just let me know.
You twisted my arm.
That's my favorite thing to do, yeah.
And I got on my hug to everyone who's listening and tuning in to Craic on the Coast, as we appreciate you joining us all the time as we celebrate Irish culture, Irish heritage here in the South Shore and beyond throughout the Commonwealth. And as we've established today, Baltimore, Chicago, and wherever else Guinness is sold.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share it with a friend. And if you've got a story to tell or a topic you'd love to hear about, maybe more about Guinness, reach out by emailing us at craiconthecoast@gmail.com. That is CRAIC on the coast @gmail.com. And follow AOH Plymouth on both Instagram and Facebook. We'll be back next time. I actually think when we record next time, I will be phoning in from my walk.
Yes, you
over
will.
in Ireland. I'll be in the middle of 100 miles in 6 days.
Yeah, except he'll probably be on mile 20 because he stopped into the pub and just hasn't moved, but that's fine.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm going to get as far as Mullingar, but we'll see. But yeah, so the next show should be good as well. But until next time, slán go fóill, goodbye for now, and may the Craic be mighty wherever you are.
Slán go fóill.